Today's lesson is why sharks don't get lost. Hi, everybody. My name is Roger.
And my name is Helen.
And today we're going to talk about sharks, the wolves of the sea. And, of course, sharks swim around in the ocean, and sometimes they get too close to shore, so we kind of get scared because we don't want to have a shark attack. But another question we have about sharks is, how do they get around? How do they navigate like birds navigate when they migrate?
Yes, this is a question that I haven't really thought about because I've always thought that animals other than humans just knew their way around. They knew which way to go to get home, which way to go to get food, that they have this natural instinct to know where they are, whereas humans tend to get lost, even more so these days because they have come to depend on digital maps and also paper maps to navigate and to find their way around.
Yeah, I get around pretty well. I know how to read maps, and I usually memorize my route before I start driving because I don't want to be pulling out my phone to look at the map and look at the road at the same time. I think it's kind of dangerous that way, so I try to figure out my route ahead of time or maybe rely on GPS. But sharks don't have that kind of stuff. Sharks can't really hold a smartphone with their fins, and of course, they certainly can't use a GPS device. So how the heck do they get around? How do they find out where home is? So today we're going to try to answer the question, why don't sharks get lost? Well, we'll tell you why sharks don't get lost. Let's get into it. Let's listen to the first part of our lesson right now.
Why sharks don't get lost. Imagine being 20,000 kilometers away from home and, without using landmarks or maps, finding your way back. It may sound impossible for humans, but for sharks, it's easy. In fact, every year, many species of sharks migrate great distances and still manage to return home. How sharks are able to navigate without getting lost has been somewhat of a mystery until now.
So imagine being 20,000 kilometers away from home and without using landmarks or maps, finding your way back. It may sound impossible for humans, but for sharks, it's easy. So indeed, if we were to imagine ourselves 20,000 kilometers away from home, and that's a very, very long distance, and we didn't have a map on us to show us the way back home, and we weren't able to use landmarks either. Landmarks are things that exist, such as buildings or rocks or anything that can tell you, give you a hint of where you are. So if you didn't have these things, would you be able to find your way back home from 20,000 kilometers away? For a human being, probably not. But for sharks, this is something easy.
Right. You might think that sharks could navigate by looking at things on the ocean floor, like mountains and thermal vents and stuff like that. But unfortunately, the ocean gets pretty deep, and sharks can't really go too deep like some of those deep-sea creatures that can live miles down in complete darkness. So they don't have these landmarks to rely on. So it's a good question. How do sharks navigate? How do they find their way back home? It may sound impossible for humans, but for sharks, it's easy. Yes, indeed, sharks can navigate in the oceans without those landmarks and without maps and without GPS.
In fact, every year, many species of sharks migrate great distances and still manage to return home. So sharks travel a lot in the ocean. They migrate. So if a shark, or let's say another type of animal such as a bird or fish migrate, it travels to another part of the world to look for food or to look for warmer weather, because a lot of animals, such as many different types of birds, can't survive in cold weather. So when they feel that winter is approaching, they will migrate south, where they will find warmer weather and the availability of food. So sharks migrate also. They need to look for food, and some sharks may need to migrate to give birth. But after they've done these things, they need to get back home. So the fact is, sharks are able to get back home without the need of landmarks and maps.
Yep, sharks have this need to move about the earth during certain times of the year. Just like in North America, we have the monarch butterfly that migrates south at certain times of the year. I think they migrate down to Mexico, down to Michoacan. But we're talking about sharks in today's program, and like butterflies and birds and other creatures, they migrate around the world. In fact, they migrate great distances, and they still manage to return home. They find their way home. How sharks are able to navigate without getting lost has been somewhat of a mystery until now. So you might ask the question, gee, how do sharks navigate without getting lost? Well, I'll tell you how sharks are able to navigate without getting lost, and it has been somewhat of a mystery until now. So navigating is different from migrating. Migrating is going from one place to the other for a specific reason, but how you get there is when you navigate. You need to figure out which roads you're going to take, where you're going to turn, etc., etc. So, of course, pilots in airplanes rely on their navigator to tell them where to go, to plot the course through the sky. And, of course, if you're sailing a boat, you need to navigate. In the old days, lots of sailors navigated by looking at the stars so they could tell which direction to go in. But in this particular case, we were kind of lost. We didn't know how sharks could navigate without getting lost. And it was somewhat of a mystery. It was pretty much a mystery until now, so scientists probably have come up with an explanation as to why sharks are able to navigate without getting lost.
Yep, and here the word somewhat just means more or less. It wasn't a complete mystery because maybe there were some clues as to how sharks navigate, but somewhat just means that it's not completely something, it's a little bit of something, more or less of something.
Indeed. So, for example, I could say Willie Nelson was somewhat disappointed at the amount of money raised at the Farm Aid concert back in the 1980s. Okay, that brings us to the end of the first part of our lesson for today. Let's move on now to the second part and hear some more about shark navigation.
In the past, scientists hypothesized that sharks navigated by using Earth's magnetic field, which is unevenly distributed across the planet and stronger near the poles. By sensing small changes in the magnetic field, the scientists theorized sharks could figure out their location and orientation. To prove this hypothesis, researchers created a large wooden cube with copper wiring surrounding it and a water tank within. They then placed sharks in the tank and passed currents through the wiring to mimic different angles and strengths of Earth's magnetic field. In one test, when the magnetic field was set to mimic a location south of the shark's habitat, the sharks oriented themselves north, as if trying to get back home. This behavior confirmed the scientists' theory.
大家好，第二部分我们看到动词 theorize 指建立理论或是推测。举例来说 Astrophysicists theorize that the universe began with an event known as the Big Bang. 天文物理学家推测宇宙起源于一场称为大爆炸的事件。或是 Scientists theorize that there are massive black holes at the center of our galaxy. 科学家推论我们的银河中央有巨大的黑洞。另外补充这个字的名词 theory, T-H-E-O-R-Y, theory, 表示论点或是推测。我们可以说 Sheila has a theory about why Ellen seems to be unhappy at work. Sheila 对于为何 Ellen 工作不愉快有个论点。或是 Do the doctors have any theories about the boy's illness? 关于这个男孩的疾病，医生有任何推测吗？接着我们看到名词 orientation 指方向或是定位，像是 Air vehicle orientation is controlled by 3 angles of rotation. 空中交通工具的方向是由3种旋转角度控制。也可以说 It is easy to lose your orientation if you can't see while you're swimming underwater. 当你在水下游泳看不见时，会很容易失去方向。另外，将这个字字尾的 ation 去掉，就变成了这个字的动词 orient， 指标定方向或是适应。我们可以说 Lost in the woods, Hilda used the rising sun to orient herself. Hilda 在森林里迷路，她利用升起的太阳来指引方向。也可以说 It took Kelly a few weeks to orient herself to the new work environment. Kelly 花了好几个礼拜才适应新的工作环境。再来，我们看到单字 wiring， 这个字是名词，指线路或是布线。像是 A regular check on the building's wirings is necessary. 定期检查大楼中的线路是必须的。也可以说 Faulty wiring may cause a fire. 有问题的线路可能会造成火灾。另外补充一个相关名词 wire， W-I-R-E, wire。这个字是名词，意思是电线或是导线。举例来说 Rob told his daughter not to touch the wires because he thought she might get hurt. Rob 叫他女儿不要碰电线，因为他觉得她可能会受伤。或是 When the man touched the wires together, the car started. 当男子将导线碰在一起时，车子就启动了。最后我们看到单字 mimic， 这个字是动词，指模拟或是模仿。举例来说 In order to protect themselves, some chameleons can mimic the colors of their surroundings. 为了保护自己，有些变色龙可以变得跟环境的颜色一样。也可以说 The kid mimicked the sound of a police car as he ran across the playground. 这个孩子在游乐场跑来跑去，模仿警车的声音。
So let's look at what scientists thought in the past about shark navigation. Now, in the past, scientists hypothesized that sharks navigated by using Earth's magnetic field, which is unevenly distributed across the planet and stronger near the poles. So, first of all, the verb hypothesize. When you hypothesize, you suggest a possible explanation for something based on the information that you have. So when you're not sure about something, but you think that it could be true, then you can hypothesize or you hypothesize about it. So in the past, scientists hypothesized that sharks navigated by using Earth's magnetic field.
Right. So, of course, the magnetic field is generated in the core of the Earth. And therefore, we have these magnetic fields around the Earth. They help birds navigate. And in this case, I guess they help sharks migrate, helps them navigate as well. I understand sea turtles use the magnetic field as well. And the magnetic field also repels the solar wind, so we don't get nasty sunburns and things like that. So again, the scientists have a hypothesis that sharks navigate by using Earth's magnetic field. And Earth's magnetic field is unevenly distributed across the planet and stronger near the poles. So it's not consistent. It's not even around the world. It's unevenly distributed. Some areas are stronger. Some areas are weaker. But we are saying that the magnetic field is stronger near the poles. And the poles, of course, refer to the North Pole and the South Pole. And if you go to those places, if you go to, say, Siberia or maybe down to the southern tip of South America, you will see the northern and southern lights, and they have to do with the Earth's magnetic field and particles coming from the sun.
Right. So since these magnetic fields are not evenly distributed and they are stronger near the poles, by sensing small changes in the magnetic field, the scientists theorized sharks could figure out their location and orientation. So the scientists theorized this conclusion. So when you theorize, you develop ideas to explain something else. So to explain how sharks navigate, they theorized that sharks sensed small changes in the magnetic field. And since they can sense these small changes, sharks can figure out, they can understand their location and orientation. So orientation refers to the direction of a particular moving body or particular body, person, or animal, or for instance, car or an airplane or a ship. It's the direction that that thing is headed to or pointed to.
Exactly. Orientation just means knowing your directions, knowing which way is north, south, east, and west. It also means learning the basic procedure for things like when I went to university, I had to attend orientation during the summer in order to learn how things work at the university, where the dorms are, how you arrange your schedule, stuff like that. That's all part of orientation. And orientation in this particular sense means you figure out which way is north, which way is south. So like when I travel, whenever I arrive in a new city, I try to figure out my directions. Okay, I've just gotten here to Bangkok, Thailand. Which way is north? And which way should I go to find the Grand Palace or whatever? That's all part of orientation. And sharks can figure out their location. They know where they are, and they know their directions. They know which is up, which is down, which is east, which is west, etc. And to prove this hypothesis, researchers created a large wooden cube with copper wiring surrounding it and a water tank within. So that's what scientists do. They come up with a possible explanation for something. They come up with a hypothesis, and then they need to test their theory. They need to test their hypothesis. So in this particular case, the scientists involved created a large wooden cube, and it has copper wiring surrounding it. So you've got these little copper wires wrapped around this wooden cube, and then inside of it, it has a water tank.
Yes, and they then placed sharks in the tank and passed currents through the wiring to mimic different angles and strengths of Earth's magnetic field. So basically, the scientists wanted to recreate Earth's magnetic field, and that's why they created this wooden cube with copper wiring around it. And here, the word to mimic means to behave or work in a way in the same way as something else. So, for instance, artificial intelligence, or AI these days, can mimic the emotions and also the ways of thinking of human beings in very surprising, unexpected ways. And here the scientists wanted to mimic Earth's magnetic field, so they created this wooden cube with wiring around it.
So that's what they did with this large wooden cube with a water tank inside it. Now, in one test, when the magnetic field was set to mimic a location south of the shark's habitat, the sharks oriented themselves north, as if trying to get back home. Interesting, okay? So they probably conducted a series of tests, and in one test, they had the magnetic field set to mimic a location south of the shark's habitat. Habitat, of course, is where you live, so they figured out where the sharks generally hang out, where they live. So this particular magnetic field, this artificial magnetic field, was mimicking a location south of where the sharks lived, okay? And as a result, the sharks oriented themselves north. They kind of turned their bodies as if they were in that position.
Yes, so the experiment worked, and the magnetic field that was produced by this wooden cube was able to trick the sharks into thinking that north was the direction that they had to go towards in order to get back home.
Indeed. So that brings us to the end of the second part of our lesson for today. Let's wrap things up now and listen to the third and final part. It's kind of short.
The researchers' discovery helps us understand sharks a little more. It also reminds us of the importance of invisible elements of nature, like magnetic fields.
So we looked at what the scientists did to prove their hypothesis was right. They created this wooden cube, and they were able to mimic Earth's magnetic field, fooling the sharks into believing that a particular direction was the direction to get home. So the researchers' discovery helps us understand sharks a little more. It also reminds us of the importance of invisible elements of nature, like magnetic fields. So we often put a lot of emphasis on things that we can see, things that we can sense, like animals and plants, but really there are a lot more to nature. And a lot of these things that make up a large part of nature are things that we can't see, are things that we can't touch. One of them is the magnetic field.
Indeed, so we're learning more and more about sharks and the magnetic field all the time. Okay, that brings us to the end of our lesson for today. Let's listen once again to our Chinese teacher.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们今天要来练习克漏字的题型，那就来看文章的5个题目。第一题他写到空格逗号 Every year, many species of sharks migrate great distances and still manage to return home. 他是说空格逗号每年有许多鲨鱼物种迁徙到很远的地方，还是能成功返家。那这题是在考我们连接副词，来看选项 A as a result 是因此结果， B however 是然而但是， C in fact 表示事实上实际上， D in addition 表示除此之外。那前面课文有提到说，在离家很远而且不使用地标或地图的情况下，人类不太可能找到回家的路，但对鲨鱼来说却很简单。然后空格后方又提到说，每年许多鲨鱼物种迁徙到很远地方还是能成功返家。我们从前后文可以推测，空格里面要填入可以对前文内容提供更详细讯息、更进一步解释说明的连接副词。那4个选项就只有 in fact 最适合，所以答案选 C in fact。第二题是 How sharks are able to navigate without getting lost? 空格 somewhat of a mystery until now. 直到现在为止，鲨鱼是如何确定行进方向而不会迷路，在某种程度上空格一个谜。这题是在考我们时态，那4个选项分别是 A has been, B was being, C will be,D is。 那这题的关键就在于 until now， 它表示直到现在为止，是用来表达某个情况直到现在才刚结束或是发生变化。那常常就会搭配现在完成式来表达说，从过去某个时间点开始持续到现在的状态。因此这题要选 A has been。 has been somewhat of a mystery 就可以表达在某种程度上一直是个谜。好，那么第3个题目他写说In the past, scientists hypothesized that sharks navigated by using Earth's magnetic field, which is unevenly 空格 across the planet and stronger near the poles. 在过去，科学家假设鲨鱼是利用地球磁场来确认方向，磁场在地球各地空格不均，而且两极附近比较强。好，这题是考我们字汇，来看选项 A distributed 表示散布分布， B occupied 表示占据占领， C preserved 表示保存维护， D expanded 表示扩大扩展。同学们注意到句子里面的 which 是用来代指前方的 Earth's magnetic field 地球磁场，那么 which is unevenly 空格就是要表达磁场什么什么不均。那从语义上来判断，它应该是要表达磁场分布不均，然后在两极附近比较强嘛，所以这边是只有 distributed 最适合，我们答案就选 A distributed 表示分布散布的意思。好，再来看到第4题，他写到 By sensing small changes in the magnetic field, the scientists theorized sharks could 空格 their location and orientation. 借由感知磁场的微小变化，科学家们推测鲨鱼可以空格它们的位置和方向。这题考我们片语动词，选项 A run into 当它的受词是事物时，可以表达撞到什么，或者是遭遇遇到什么，可能是遇到困难啊、麻烦等等。B figure out 表示厘清、弄清楚、弄懂或者想出。C look up 它的受词是事物时，可以表达查阅、检索，像是在字典啊、书籍中或是电脑上来查阅什么什么。D call off 是表达取消、停止或终止。根据课文，它是要表达鲨鱼可以借由感知磁场的微小变化来搞清楚、弄清楚自己的方向位置，所以最适合片语动词是 B figure out。 第5题 In one test, when the magnetic field was set to mimic a location south of the shark's habitat, the sharks oriented themselves north. 逗号空格 trying to get back home. 好，在一项测试中，当磁场被设定为模拟鲨鱼栖息地南方的一个地点时，鲨鱼让自己面向北方。逗号空格试着回家。好，这题其实是在考连接词哦，特别注意空格后方呢是现在分词 trying， 我们可以推断它是省略的主词。那因为这个主词跟前方的主要子句主词 the sharks 相同，所以它才被省略，然后把这个动词部分改用 trying 来表达。那 trying to get back home 其实是在表达那些鲨鱼试着要回家。好，那我们现在来看选项 A If only 表示但愿，要是怎么样怎么样就好了。那之后是要接假设句来表达所希望的事可以成真。B Only if 表示只有点点点才，这是用来强调只有在某个条件成立下，主要子句的情况才会发生。C Even if 表示即使就算，那这是 if 强调说法，用来引导条件或假设情况去强调说不管情况是否成立都不影响结果。D as if 表示仿佛，就如同点点点一般。那从语义上来看，课文应该是要表达那些鲨鱼让自己面向北方，仿佛他们要试着回家。所以这题最适合的答案就是 D as if。 好，那么以上是今天的讲解，我们来回顾今天的单字吧。
Navigate. Birds navigate by using, among other things, cues from the sun and stars. Orientation. Thanks to its orientation, this building is very energy efficient. Hypothesis. The results from the study confirmed our hypothesis. Cube. Cut the carrots into small cubes and add them to the soup. Copper. There is a large copper statue of a bull outside that building. Habitat. This forest provides a habitat for numerous species of birds.
Well, everyone, today's article has come to an end, and I sure hope you enjoyed reading along with us. I am Roger.
I'm Helen.
See you next time.